Hello, my name is Zach Dressel, and I'm the curator at the Earl Scruggs Center located in Uptown Shelby, North Carolina. I want to begin by welcoming you to our Coffee with the Curator series, which is a monthly program we usually host here at the Earl Scruggs Center that focuses on Cleveland County history and the Cleveland County Historical Collection, bringing fun and interesting stories from the county's past to life. This month, we have decided to change things up just a little bit by taking a tour of the beautiful Banker's House located here in Shelby. The Banker's House got its name from local historian Lee B. Weathers, who coined the term in his book, The Living Past of Cleveland County. The name is derived from the home's long and storied past as being owned solely by bankers who lived in Shelby. The beautiful home was built by one of the founders of what would become the First National Bank in Shelby, Jesse Jenkins, in 1875. After falling into financial hardship, Jenkins was forced to sell not only his interest in the bank, but also his beautiful home in 1879. With this, the Banker's House changed hands to H.D. Lee, who was one of Jenkins's business partners at the time. The house would then change hands again in 1894 as it was purchased by another president of First National Bank, Burwell Blanton. The house would remain in the Blanton family for the next 112 years, passing from Burwell and his wife Patty to their son Charles to his nephew George Jr., all of whom served as presidents of the First National Bank. In 2007, after the passing of George Jr.'s wife Nancy, the property was given to Preservation North Carolina, which subsequently turned the home over to the Banker's House Foundation, which opened the house to the public and maintains it as an event venue today. Thank you for joining us on a tour led by Executive Director of the Banker's House, Carolyn Jackson. We hope you enjoyed it.
Welcome you to the Banker's House. I'm Carolyn Jackson. I'm the executive director here of this wonderful historic property, which is not a museum because it is not exactly the way it was when it was built in 1875. I am so glad that you're here today. Tell us about it.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. And so what we're doing is we're partnering with the Banker's House today to kind of not only show you this beautiful historic house, but also teach you a little bit about Cleveland County's history, and particularly one of the more prominent families in Cleveland County's history, and that would be the Blanton family, who lived in this house for several decades. And Carolyn will talk more about that later, but this is a part of our Coffee with the Curator series that we do with the Earl Scruggs Center, and we thought it'd be fun to kind of go out in the community and look at some of these historic sites and show you guys some more historic pieces of Shelby's history and Cleveland County's history. So Carolyn is going to give us kind of an overview of this house's history, and then we're going to kind of go on a tour, and then Carolyn, again, will be kind of talking us through some of the more interesting parts of the house. And this is a very quirky house because of the fact that it was built in 1875, and so it's had a lot of updates and a lot of changes, but then some things have stayed the same, and we'll talk more about that. And then I'll be kind of throwing in some historic kind of factoids along the way, some things that I know that might contribute to the way that we understand this house. So Carolyn, I'm gonna let you take it away again and kind of introduce us to this house.
Okay, well, this is a very perfect time for you to be here. In December, we are dressed up for the holiday season. Compliments of several of the merchants in town and individuals. So as we go through, we'll talk about that. But in 1875, there was a couple by the name of Hattie Beam and Jesse Jenkins who resided here. And Jesse had a company called Jenkins Company. It actually is the forerunner to what is now Bank OZK Uptown. It was the bank in town. And he also was in the legislature of North Carolina, as was her father. So she made many trips to Raleigh when they were going to meet. And she would see these Second Empire houses that were in Raleigh, and she wanted a house like this. Hattie and Jesse had no children, and so Jesse always wanted to make Hattie happy, so they came back and they started this house in 1874 and moved in 1875. after they'd spent $7,500 building it. Got here and realized they could not afford to keep it. It was reconstruction time, and they just had some financial difficulties. So they offered it to either a family member or a friend for $3,000, but he couldn't raise the money. So it was sold on the courthouse square, right where you are, the curator, now today. That is now the Earl Scruggs Center, for $1,510 to Mrs. Lee. And Mr. Lee bought that business, so it became the Lee Company. And Mr. and Mrs. Lee moved into this house. And somewhere along the way, Burl Blanton got involved with the business and ended up buying this house. So once he moved in, generations of Blantons lived here from then on. However, the very last Blantons who lived here, George and Nancy, and George was president of First National Bank of Shelby. By the way, it wasn't First National Bank of Shelby until 1905, and the government federated it into First National Bank of Shelby. So in addition to the house, they also owned that bank for over 100 years, and relatives were presidents of the bank. George and Nancy were the only two people to raise children in this house, and they raised these three daughters. Catherine Blanton Freeburg now lives in Georgetown. Lydia Blanton Matthews now lives in Sullivan's Island. And unfortunately, Nancy D. was in an accident from a commuting train. She was a banker in New York, and there was a commuting train accident back in the 70s. And so she's no longer with us, but we talk about her a lot. We feel like we know her.
Sure.
And the Blantons gave the house away that on their death, it would be shared with the community. What a gift to the rest of everything else we try to do in Cleveland County. So that's kind of the beginning of how all this started. The room we're in right now is probably the most modern room, and when you look around, you can see probably it was renovated in the 60s or the 70s. However, the interior of the house has never been changed. The exterior of the house has never been changed. So it has been maintained, and we want that to happen, but we can invite in everybody to come and see it now.
Sure, and so for those of you watching, that was a lot of information in one go, but one of the things that really sticks out to me is that this house, as you had mentioned, was built by the Jenkinses for $7,500, which today does not seem like a lot of money when houses can cost as much as $200,000 or, for a regular family-sized home. However, back then, your average 4-bedroom house would have cost an average of around $700. So you're talking about a house that was at the time worth 10 times more than the average family home in Cleveland County for a 4-bedroom house. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scale of what it meant for this house to be built when it was built. It was, one of the most defining houses in Shelby in particular, but also in Cleveland County as a whole at the time. And I really like, Carolyn, how you mentioned that when the Blantons gave the property up to the community, that's something that's very important, because another thing that's great about this house's history is its role in the community. It was such a major gathering point for a lot of the social elite in Shelby for such a very long time, and that goes all the way back to Burwell Blanton, when the Blantons first started, and also the Jenkinses would host a lot of parties here. The Blantons hosted several parties and different gatherings here over the years, and it became a real mainstay and staple of the Shelby landscape during that time. So it's extremely important to know that not only was it a part of the community back then, but it is still serving a very important role in the community today as a venue and as an event center, and kind of still maintaining that community focus. So now I guess we're going to kind of move around the house and kind of look at some other rooms, talk about some more history, talk about the Blanton family some more, I'm sure, and so we'll bring you guys along with us.
guest bedroom, or it was when the Blanton family lived here. And this year, for the first time in the decorations, we actually have a bed in the room. That's new to us.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks to Bill and Myra Willis, who own Shelby Antiques.
Okay.
That they actually have decorated 3 rooms, and I will point that out, and this is one of them. And they try to keep in the period of what they're trying to portray, and it certainly fits with this room.
Oh, it's absolutely beautiful. And the last time I was here, and he gave me a tour, like you said, all this furniture wasn't here. So it's really nice to kind of see the rooms being used as they would have been used back when the family was still living here.
Right.
Part of, I'm sure, the way that the building is purposed now, you can't always keep furniture in all these rooms because you need to be able to have people setting up things in different rooms and things like that. So it's kind of nice every once in a while to get this kind of peek into what it would look
Well,
like.
a lot of people have commented how nice they think a bed looks in this room. And we think it kind of completes it as well.
Sure.
So, and I didn't mention when we were in the room where the girls' pictures were hanging, that Megan Pope of Pope Events and her mother, Glenda Pope, decorated that room. So as we go through, I'll also talk about who did all of this for us for the holidays.
Great. Well, thank you.
And this is the dining room where the family had their meals because the kitchen was used for cooking, and we'll talk about that. It was decorated by Libby Ager. Libby's husband, Scott, is our facilities person here and can do anything. So we appreciate all the work that she has done to show us how dressy the dining room could be. Another unique thing about this room is we do have the portraits of Nancy, and George is right here behind me. And they're, as I said, the last couple who lived in the house and the ones who are responsible for giving it away. It is a 501c owned by a foundation here in Cleveland County.
Great.
And of course, one of the mainstays of any house is the kitchen. And this time, Diane Wilson and her daughter Erica decided that they would decorate it with the villages. They've actually decorated in this kitchen for the last 3 years, so we think they really did make it interesting for us this year. Obviously, when you look at the kitchen, the tall windows that are over here go all the way down to the floor, and so you know that the cabinetry was put in here at a later time. Mr. Blanton, George Blanton, built the cabinets at, I'm not sure what year, but you just have to kind of look around and say, well, they look like they may have been built, and name your own year. In this kitchen, there was cooking going on all the time. Mrs. Blanton had someone who cooked for them, and as I said, they were served in the dining room.
Yeah, and that's this is one of my favorite rooms in the entire house for that reason. That this is one of the rooms that when you look at it, it's clearly been, updated the most frequently. So there's pieces in here that look like they could have come straight out of the 50s or out of the 60s, or all the way up until the Blantons moved out, and it changed hands. And that's, one of the most interesting things about this house in general is that it was a lived-in house. So, a lot of historic homes you go to, they were sometimes maintained in the period they were built. So this, if you're talking about 1875, you would have furniture from 1875, you'd have the original layout from 1875. But the fact of the matter is, this house was lived in for another, several decades. And so, of course, to make it livable, you have to update it along with the current trends. So they got a refrigerator, they built this cabinetry, which would not have been here originally. They put in new stoves, they put in, it's constant updating to make this house a livable place for somebody on up into the 20th century and into the middle part of the 20th century.
And that's right, Zach, and that's the very reason that I tell people this is not a museum, but it is a very special historic property.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that people out there understand that value, that just because it's not strictly 1875 doesn't mean there's not an immense amount of historic value in this place, because you can see how people used it. And that's something I've mentioned in a lot of other Coffee with the Curators, is that as a curator, I like to see how things were used, not so much the prime example or the perfect example of something, but how people lived with whatever they had, whether it be a historic object or a historic house. I think what's more important are the stories that are involved in that house, and in seeing different updates and in seeing the kind of patchwork quilt things that we're going to kind of see as we go through this tour, you get a real impression of those stories and how this house was lived in, which is so important.
The decorations here in the entryway, the hallway, were done by Vicki Knapp of Victoria Stevens and Pfeiffer's, and we appreciate the fact that she has decorated something for us every year and made it beautiful. Well, Zach, as you see, this is the major sitting room. This is where you would have invited all your guests, and the Blantons had a lot of guests. It was in the 90s that George and Nancy decided that they wanted to share this house because so many people had never been in it. And then he died in 2001, and she died in 2006. So at that point, the house was ready to be shared, and plans were made over a period of several years as to what we would do, and here we are today. Lovely decorated Victorian furniture, again by Bill and Mara Willis, that we appreciate. And if you have an antique store, you can find a lot of toys, and these are kind of interesting toys.
Sure, and we had mentioned at the beginning of this tour, and you just kind of mentioned it again, that they had a lot of guests, the Blantons did, and that was the same way going all the way back to when Charles Blanton had the house before them, and because they were they were the bankers, basically for the town of Shelby. Because of that, they kind of hobnobbed with everybody that was in the higher society of Shelby. You're talking the Gardners, the Webbs. A lot of these big family names their family would come over, they'd have parties, they'd do all kinds of entertaining here at this house, and so it's great that this space is still used for entertaining today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I might note while we're in this room, because it's pretty obvious that we have the shutters on the windows, and that is true throughout the house. That is something that is typical of Second Empire houses, to have the wonderful, in this case, in these rooms, walnut shutters on all the windows.
Well, and they're absolutely beautiful.
Okay, Zach, let's go up to the second floor, and that's where the bedrooms are for most of the family. Well, we're on the second floor where some of the family bedrooms were. This is the master bedroom that now has bedroom furniture in it, and is quite a nice large room. The two rooms on the other side were occupied by two of the daughters, with a bath in the middle, shared. And it's now our bridal boudoir, where the brides can get ready when they're having a wedding here, and the guys get to use the suite underneath the rooms that we've already been in. This may be one of the most interesting parts of the house. If you've noticed as we've walked through, and probably you'd have to really visit to see this, the pattern of the 3 stories is alike. A couple of small rooms with a bath on that side, a large room on this side, and a front area. And you find a lot of things that are pretty interesting up here. Among them is that 2 of the rooms have never been finished from the time they were built. So they were just used like attic space. And I'm going to invite you into one of the rooms to show you kind of what the walls look like and the floors and some other interesting things we have.
Yeah, and before we head in there, we talked about at the beginning of this, tour that the Jenkinses who built this home in 1875 had kind of overspent. And this was one of the areas where you can really see where they were starting to run out of money, which is why 2 of these rooms remained unfinished from the day it was constructed, is because they just ran out of money midway through construction and had to cut corners in some places.
And actually, until George and Nancy moved in 1937 when they got married, and as their children came along, after there were 3 daughters who didn't want to share a bedroom, Mr. Blanton had somebody to come up here and complete this room. It was not finished either until probably sometime in the 40s. And of course, this is one of the interesting rooms that is unfinished. You can see from the walls and the floor. And we do have a relatively large box that's here. This was found in the barn when we were cleaning out to renovate the barn, make it an event venue in 2017. And there is a story with this box. It is a relative of the family, Eunice Webb, who went to visit family in probably 1914, 15, 16 in the summer. And you know, you would stay a long time. Well, she got scarlet fever and she died, and they shipped her back and her casket in this box. And the most amazing thing is we still have the label here with the name of the funeral home and where it says the body of her name is filled in. She's buried at Sunset Cemetery in the whole Blanton plot, but this is a wonderful box to store a lot of things in, and it's a very heavy structure. It is a tower, which is typical of Second Empire houses. I have asked questions about why. I really don't know, but I do know that the airflow is wonderful in the summer when you've got things open. That could very well be. But
and it's definitely kind of cool in here right now. You can feel that you get some good airflow.
You get some good airflow, yeah. And it is the place here at the Banker's house that a lot of our brides like to have their portraits made right there on that stairway.
Again, I want to thank you for joining us on that wonderful tour led by Executive Director of the Banker's House, Carolyn Jackson. I would also like to give a special thanks to Carolyn for taking time out of her busy day to show us through the home. Another acknowledgement I would like to make is if you would like to learn more about the Banker's House, please feel free to pick up a copy of Joe Dupree's book, Voices in Time, Stories from the Banker's House. In this book, Joe gives a great detail as to the early history of the Banker's House and also follows one of its more interesting patrons, Hattie Beam Jenkins, throughout her extravagant and interesting life. Again, I want to thank you, and I hope that you continue to watch more of our videos as we upload them.